You're listening to Cat Tales, the podcast of SLC Faculty Local 417, your union connection. Each episode, we bring you real stories from our members, practical tips on your rights, and the kind of information that helps us all move forward.
Welcome back to Cat Tales. I'm your host, Julie White. Yes, this is a long one, and yes, we know it's summer. You're on vacation. Attention spans are somewhat between a hammock and a cold drink. But that's exactly why we're glad you're here. Today's episode goes deep. It winds a little and it takes its time because some stories deserve the space. And while you're settling in, a quick reminder, if you haven't checked out our 5-part parody series, Only Mergers in the Building, now's the perfect moment. It's all streaming, it's all ridiculous, and it's all rooted in the very real chaos of college mergers. Also, make sure you're signed up for Cat Tales episodes so you don't miss a sporadic summer drop, like this one, where we're about to talk to our new president, Gillian Axten. We're not always predictable, but we're always worth a listen. All right, let's get into it. This last year has been one of the most devastating in the history of the Ontario college system. That's how the June 2026 College Faculty Bulletin begins, and it's hard to argue with it. Across Ontario, faculty are facing unprecedented layoffs, program suspensions, restructuring, and a quiet but massive shift in how college work is being delivered. The bulletin says it plainly. The work isn't disappearing, it's moving. And here at St. Lawrence College, that shift has taken on a new dimension, the announced merger between St. Lawrence and Fleming College. On June 17th, SLC President Glenn Vollebrek sent out an all-notes email describing the merger as an integration and an opportunity. But what was missing was any meaningful detail and any transparency. Locals 417 and 418 responded with a joint union letter requesting clarity, rationale, measurable outcomes, and information about impacts on faculty and staff. That letter was sent on June 24th. As of today's recording, there's been no official response. So today's episode is about two things happening at the same time: the restructuring of the college system across Ontario and the restructuring that's happening right here at home. And to help us understand what this moment means, I'm joined by Local 417 President Gillian Axten. It's July 1st. It's her first official day in the seat. And Gillian co-signed that letter and is stepping into leadership at a time when faculty need answers, transparency, and collective action. So the CAAT bulletin makes it clear. Governments aren't cutting investment in workforce training. They're redirecting it. On May 27th, Ontario announced $1.7 billion for 70,000 new seats in healthcare, STEM, education, and skilled trades. It announced funding tied to employer and industry partnerships and mandatory priority growth plans that will determine where colleges grow and where they don't. This is part of a long-term strategy that starts in K-12 through Bill 98 and continues into colleges. The province is steering students into quote-unquote jobs of the future, and colleges are being reshaped to deliver that agenda. At the federal level, the Team Canada Strong strategy aims to train 100,000 new Red Seal trades workers, again, through colleges. Colleges Ontario is already positioning colleges as the delivery system for this shift. So across Ontario, traditional diploma programs, electrical, instrumentation, manufacturing, business, community services are being suspended. Faculty are being laid off or displaced. But apprenticeship training, contract training, continuing education, industry-funded programming, and online delivery are expanding. The CAAT bulletin says the work has not disappeared, it's moved. And much of that work is happening outside traditional academic structures, often without full-time faculty positions attached. Since 2020, $2.5 billion in Skills Development Fund projects have gone to training that should have been delivered by public colleges, with another $1 billion coming. This is the restructuring of the college system. It's not hypothetical. It's not future tense. It's happening now. The numbers are staggering. Ontario colleges have already lost approximately 3,000 full-time and partial load faculty positions, a 20% reduction in 1 year. And that doesn't include the most recent year. The pattern is consistent: to cut full-time and partial load positions, expand training through alternate delivery models. Academic work isn't disappearing. The faculty positions are. On June 17th, SLC President Glenn Vullebrecht, in an all-notes email, described the integration with Fleming as opportunities, efficiencies, and growth. It did not include the rationale behind the merger, the data presented to the Board of Governors, any measurable outcomes, the impacts on programs, workload, staffing, or working conditions, or any plan for meaningful engagement with faculty or staff. Locals 417 and 418 submitted a joint union letter on June 24th requesting this information. The letter asked, what are the defined goals of the merger? What measurable outcomes are being used to justify this decision? How are these anticipated benefits expected to directly support students, faculty, and staff? It also emphasized that belonging cannot be a value in name only, and that meaningful engagement must happen now, not after decisions are finalized. As of today, there's been no response from President Vullebrecht. This silence is part of a larger pattern across the Ontario college system: restructuring without transparency, decisions without consultations, and impacts without accountability. The bulletin urges every CAAT local to use Article 28 and the CESC to demand transparency. Ask for priority growth plans, annual budgets, workforce development funding, contract training activity, industry partner agreements, skills development fund projects, information on new training divisions and growth initiatives. If we only look at cuts, we miss at where the colleges are growing and who is doing that work. The bulletin is unequivocal. Information gathered and collective agreement enforcement are essential. However, they won't protect our work. Only organizing can. Every local should have a local joint organizing committee. Every member should join it, because the restructuring isn't limited to CAAT A. It's across all divisions, and the college system is now wall-to-wall OPSU-CEFPO. An injury to one division is an injury to all, and coordinated bargaining is the answer. To provide more detail about all of this, I am thrilled to welcome President Gillian Axten. Gillian, you're stepping into leadership at a moment when the college system is undergoing the most significant transformation in its history. And when St. Lawrence College is entering a merger with Fleming that's raised more questions than answers. You co-signed the joint letter requesting transparency, and as of today, there's really been no response. So let's talk about what this moment means. So tell me about the letter and what prompted Locals 417 and 418 to take that step.
So we had contemplated something like this, the hopes that the college was going to reach out to us when we first heard about the mergers. Well, what prompted the poke with the big stick was the statement that Glenn made about the mergers and how due diligence is now finally done and they're moving forward. So moving forward without faculty or support staff is terrifying, because now they're making plans for all of us without us at the table. So moving forward with their decision making of what they're going to do, and we're just going to have to follow along like good little minions. Except we know as faculty that management doesn't have a clue as to what we do. For that matter, they don't even understand our programs. They don't understand our students, but they definitely don't understand our programs. And we see evidence of that all the time. We know that the cut in um, accessibility advisors, the cut in athletics, but all of the cuts, all of those little cuts that we saw 2 years ago are now really showing within our students. We espouse this idea of belonging at SLC, and yet I don't know about you guys, but I don't feel like I belong. I feel like we are being told what to do, and we're just going to have to bear the consequences.
So what does the silence, and you did receive an acknowledgement that from labor relations.
We sent the letter to Glenn. We sent the letter to Labor Relations. We sent the letter to Shelley Ainsworth Spanks, depending on what she's using as title now. It's either lead in merger or AVP, Associate VP Academic. So we received a letter of acknowledgement that they've received it, but basically it's we'll talk to you when we're ready, which means all of the plans will be done and then we will be told. I can't imagine that all of a sudden they're going to become consultative. Um, so we know it's just going to be here's what's happening. The complicated things, we don't have a clue what merger means. It is contemplated in the collective agreement. Um, our collective agreement has got a letter of understanding, but that was a time when the colleges were in an expansionist viewpoint, not in a shrinking viewpoint. So the college, St. Lawrence Algonquin, merged all of their French programs and created La Cité Collégiale. So yes, SLC lost, especially Cornwall campus, lost our French nursing program to La Cité. We lost a bunch of people, but nobody lost their job. They were just transferred to this new created college. And so it was an expansionist version, and they hired on more people and so on and so forth. This is not this day and age. We are looking at a shrinkage. And so we don't know what that means. We know that there are programs with no full-time faculty. Um, so are they just going to remain vacant until the merger occurs and then they'll scoop faculty with the most seniority to staff? Is the plan to not have full-time faculty in programs anymore? Um, the issue that I'm having with the college is they have a right to manage. Yes, they have a right to manage badly. All of those things are true. It would be helpful, even if they're managing badly, if we understood what they were doing so we could prepare our members for what happens next.
Mhm. One of the things that really struck me with the CAAT memo that just came out was that huge the workforce shift and what that's looking like, and really opened my eyes in terms of where that system-wide restructuring is, because we live in kind of the SLC world where we know our management team and we see what's happening, and we reflect on that as being, well, that's those people, or that's that collection of individuals. But how does the SLC Fleming merger fit into the broader restructuring that we're seeing in Ontario's call?
So there's a few things that are going on that we don't have a handle on. So first thing, we're the only two colleges to be merging at this point, and I think we might be the litmus test. I think there are probably other colleges waiting for us to work out the kinks of how this is done before they go forward. Yay for being the first. Yikes. Um, the other thing that's occurring province wide is there's a shift from who's teaching what. So we're seeing there is grants being offered from the federal government called the Skills Development Fund. And what's occurring is colleges are bidding on these skills development funds. And we saw this in the early 2000s because I was there. But instead of bringing students into programs we already have or modifying programs and allowing the community college to teach these students, they're actually creating these private partner relationships where businesses are taking the field placement components and the academic, and these are all being manned by part-time precarious workers. So that huge amount of money is still coming into the college system. It's just not coming to the community college system. It's being divvied up into this weird private business.
We have any of that at St. Lawrence right now?
We don't know.
Is there any at Fleming?
We don't know.
And Orwin, that the consortium that Glenn is now the president of, any clue what's going on there? Is that what
That could be the body in which these monies are being funded through or funneled through to create programs. We don't have an awful lot of information. And Glenn and the college has been moot on it. We have requested this information, but we don't have it yet. Of course, we'll get back to you. Um, but we don't have that information. And so again, like they may not have it at their fingertips, especially because I believe that there's two or three people making these kind of decisions and they're not sitting with us. And so there's a real gap between the decision makers, Glenn, Shelley, Julie Enerson, maybe, and the rest of management, where they are really allowing management to not lie because they just don't know.
so are you seeing some parallels between this provincial shift and kind of what the merger potentially is, towards, more workforce development, industry-aligned training as
And
opposed to
it's
college education?
Yeah, it's a complicated thing within the college system because that is our raison d'être, right? Is to be industrial trained. We're supposed to, see where the community has gaps and provide training for those gaps. What the distinction is if we are training a student to work in company A and the only skills we're giving them is to work in company A and they get no certification except to work in company A. And when company A fires them or they decide to move to Timbuktu or wherever, they want to take their credentials and go elsewhere. They don't have any. And that's the difference between a standalone community college program and these inbred or in-baked industrial programs. So we saw it at Northern College. We saw it through our loss of the chef program, where now the program is being given in Toronto restaurants. And so these people are going to be hired by these restaurants because they've been trained there. But once they leave, they have the experience, but they don't actually have any credentials to their name. So some industries might be okay with that, maybe cooking. But things like mining and other things, there's no way that that would fly. So that's the difference is what we are, our reason for existence is to supply and to support community. But we do that so that once a student is completed, they can then go elsewhere. These industrial based are creating workforces for one particular company. It's not even an industry, it's a company. And when they leave, then they have no ability to transfer that diploma. They have the skill, maybe, depending on how specific.
And if they leave with not a positive recommendation, things happen in workplaces. So if you're not able to get a reference from your chef,
Then not only do you not have a diploma, but you also don't have the recommendation. You may be able to put the experience, but are you going to be employable? So we are, in many ways, we're creating an old fashioned version of the company store where you are forced to work at this place for the rest of your career because you can't get out. You'll only have this one place to work.
and the government's really forcing that to happen.
Yes, well, the provincial government wants to support industry quickly. And you know what? The fastest way of getting jobs is to cut out everything except for what that company needs. So if you're doing, let's say, bookkeeping, or an accounting diploma, a 3-year accounting diploma, you would know all sorts of things that you'd be able to apply in all sorts of industrial contexts. But if you're going to work as a bookkeeper in this one specific industry and one specific place in town and reduce the amount of tasks, then you don't need all the periphery of information. So yeah, training's a lot faster. Um, and so we're getting people out quickly, but that doesn't mean it's good for the students or actually overall good for the industry.
Yeah, exactly. All right. So let's talk a little bit about the risks that are there with the merger. What risks are posed for faculty work, for academic integrity, and for that community-based education?
So again, we don't know a lot, right? So this is complete conjecture.
Mhm.
I unfortunately see our sisters and brothers and support staff being impacted first and hardest. And we're going to see that, don't want to scare people, but you think timetabling's bad now? Wait till it's done centrally at another place by someone who's never seen a campus. Like, because that's what's going to happen. At some point, the seniority lists are going to come into play. And if you're doing timetabling in Fleming and you have 30 years experience, well, you know what? You're going to be doing it for all of us because you're going to be merging that kind of thing. So I know that we're going to see support staff impacted first and fastest because they're already talking about, merging of services really quickly. Merging of programs is going to take a little longer, mostly because we have 2 and 3 year programs. And so you can't just tell students, sorry, you now got to go to Peterborough to finish your program. So
Mhm.
we got a little bit more lead time for longer programs. But what does it mean for staffing? No idea. Like right now, we have a BCom that starts in September, its first year. I think most of it's designed, but I'm not 100% sure. And we have no more full time faculty teaching in that program. That's a 4 year program. So we have no full time faculty assigned. Does that mean they're going to recall faculties? Does that mean they're going to move faculty from other programs into it? Could be. They have a right to manage. Or does that mean there's a whole bunch of BCom people waiting in Fleming that are going to come in and because we have vacancies, take those positions? Fair enough. But again, I don't know what I don't know. So at some point in the next year or so, we will be merging seniority lists. And that, I've had a lot of questions from people asking me, what does that look like? Where do I fall on the seniority list? The problem is seniority lists are not the same. They're not transparent. We don't know what that means with areas of specialty. So if you're in the community service department, that could mean you are a disability worker, an SSW, an addiction and mental health worker, an ECE worker, a police foundations worker. We are not all interchangeable. And so how some seniority lists work is that that's how they list their seniority. They don't have it divided up by school like we do. So I don't know where I am on the seniority list or you or anybody else. I can't tell. And we won't know that until we actually know when is the merger? When do they want us to merge seniority lists? And then the question is, what do we keep? Like I'm trying to look at their lists and our lists of programs and sort of guess what makes sense to keep, you know, on any given campus. But I have no idea what that means or what it looks like or what we're going to keep. And are we going to keep everything? Are we going to expand? I can't imagine.
And that seems to be the thing that Glenn keeps talking about, though, is that this is about expansion, folks.
Hmm. But
Is it?
honestly, that's the puzzler to me. So let's take a program that they keep saying we're going to get, which would be diagnostic imaging. Big, lots of conversations about diagnostic imaging. It's been something that I know Barb LeBlanc has really wanted in Brockville for a long time. She's done a lot of work on it. We have this space, blah, blah, blah. But a student who has the potential of either going to diagnostic imaging at Algonquin or Brockville or Peterborough, I don't think all of a sudden we're going to have more students show up to fill all 3 programs. Maybe they're oversubscribed, but I don't know if they're oversubscribed that much. So student A who lives in Cornwall is going to have to make a decision. I go to Algonquin or I go to Peterborough. they're already making that decision. It doesn't matter if it's offered at 2 or 3 campuses. I don't think suddenly people are going to come out of the woodwork. Now, for some really oversubscribed programs, maybe we'll fill, but I'm not sure if that's going to be the case in all programs all the time. So I don't know if this is going to be an I can't even fathom this as an expansionist model, because expansion, we know every domestic student loses us money. So how in the world does expansion save us money? It doesn't make any sense. So unless we're starting to bring in, again, hundreds and hundreds of international students, then I can see it as expansion, but we know we can't, and we won't be able to. So again, where's the financial?
Yeah, or is it about the cuts to what goes into the cost of each of those, domestic students? So what are we cutting? Are we counting that head? And again, it's a teacher somewhere else, and they're trying to create a new level of teacher as well, correct? Of
Um, yes. So what's been occurring with the online learning is Ontario Learn has always been lurking in the background. And it has always had this really weird pay model where you get paid per the student. You don't get paid for the class. So if you work for Ontario Learn, you get paid per head. And more with the technology being better and better, more and more courses are going to be gobbled up by Ontario Learn. And so I would, not a soothsayer, but I'll predict that at least our gen eds will all be based on that model within the year, and potentially communications as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if math goes that way. And eventually we get to science, especially those intro science courses.
Okay, and Ontario Learn, um, is across the province.
Yes. And it's completely asynchronous online. And so it could be manned by anybody. It'll definitely won't be a full time worker. Um, and we don't have any, like, I don't know if you've ever done an asynchronous course, but it's prepared for you or by you, and then the students do it and you do the grading. And with Ontario Learn and with the really hard push the college is doing, is they want at least 30% of what we teach to be automatically graded. And I want everybody to get that. 30%, it's come out of an associate or a dean's mouth. 30% of what we teach needs to be graded automatically.
Okay, and fill us in on what that looks like on a Swift, Jillian.
So that means everybody will get 0.229, which is the new factor, the new blended factor. I would hazard to guess that if we did a survey of all our members, we're already there. Um, and I think that's a push to try to nickel and dime the amount of time we get per student to grade, and therefore put on more coursework. So they can stuff more things into our Swift. And a lot of us will also be given course development, specifically asynchronous course development.
For Ontario Learn?
Doesn't say for Ontario Learn, they just say it's for us. And some of it truly will be for us. I know that there's been some really bad experience with Ontario Learn preparing nurses. And so we pulled our bridge program out of it because the students that were being bridged were terrible. They didn't have the knowledge to be able to succeed. And so we've pulled it back into our own hands. But courses that upper management thinks are less important, like gen eds, like communications, I wouldn't be surprised if they move into the Ontario Learn sphere.
Okay, so Jillian, just going back in the new programs that St. Lawrence has brought online, the ones that Glenn keeps talking about, I think I think there were 12 or 15. The majority of them were Ontario Learn.
Yeah. So they're not really our programs. Ontario Learn is a standalone college. We might own the material. We will be forced to design the material because that's part of our job description. But in no way does that mean ongoing work for our faculty.
So who are the faculty then, or who are the people who are involved with interacting with students?
Interacting, let's go with that. That's a big word. Um, so they are, if you are hired by Ontario Learn, you're hired as a facilitator, you're a precarious worker, you get paid by the head, and you don't work for St. Lawrence College. Let's be very clear. You work for Ontario Learn. Um, so all the programs that are going to be given to Ontario Learn that have our name on it won't be manned by faculty, our faculty. They'll be manned by somebody, someone. Technically, they should be Ontario workers, but because they're not working for St. Lawrence College or they're not working under OPSU, they could be anywhere. And so does that mean you can pick up, our course is going to be graded by someone in Saskatchewan? I don't know, because we have no
Overseas.
overseas, because we have no insight in that. And with 30% minimum, 30% being graded by the computer, Blackboard or whatever, then we're looking at 70%. And all these courses is grading from a faculty perspective. Like theoretically, you should be able to answer questions and interact with your students. But we know if you've ever taken one, there's often not a lot of interaction with the professor.
Okay. And therefore, we're gonna see some pretty significant impacts for our students.
Oh my God, we're going to see failure rate like you've never seen before. So it's going to be I see two things. You're going to have the students who are using ChatGPT and using the computer and are getting 100% but learning nothing. And then you're going to have the students who have this Ontario Learn course and are simply going to forget about it because why would you think about it? And they're going to fail. And, sure, you'll get a little bit in between, but I would suspect we're going to have 30 and 30. So 30% are going to get 100% and 30% we're going to fail. And that's a big distinction. And what are we going to do for those students who fail? They're going to have to take it again and again and again and again until they finally do it. And that means more and more and more money, or they're just not going to get it. And that, to me, that's a real predictable thing. In the early 2000s, we got on a real push for retention. We wanted to retain our students because our numbers were low. We wanted to make sure that we kept the students that we had. My assumption now is we're not going to have that retention anymore. And we really don't give a shit about retention. If we did, we'd have a whole bunch of stuff in place for retention. Now retention is whatever. And so what's going to occur is we're going to see this huge failure rate from these online courses, and we're not going to be able to retain our students, which then is going to bring down our student numbers and make us less viable. It's this like we are creating this slippery slope of failure.
And for those that pass and they're not doing the learning while they pass, what does that mean
So
once they
let's
get
take
into classrooms and once they get
absolutely.
into into the workforce?
And we know from over and over and over again when we talk to industry, what's the number one thing they want us students to have is they want our students to have soft skills and communication skills. And when we put 275 students, and yes, I said that right, 275 students in a COM 110 class in September, you don't get those flipping skills.
Wasn't that long ago. I remember that our slogan at SLC was small class sizes.
I do remember that. Mhm. Built in and designed for community,
Mhm. Mhm.
embedded in community. That was it. Embedded in community and small class sizes. We are no longer embedded in community, and we do not have small class
It's
sizes.
a factory.
Mhm. And we're
All
going
right.
with a strange model. I don't know if it's going to work or not. I think it's an interesting model, and maybe it has, I'm old. Maybe it's just me being old and cranky that this model, won't work. But let's see. Is the BCom has students doing a whole bunch of asynchronous stuff, and then they come in for 2 full days of classes. So that makes a commute less daunting. If you are from the GTA, let's say, you take the train in, you arrive at 8:30 in the morning, you start classes at 9, you do 9 to 5 or 9 to 7 or something horrible. You spend the night in a hotel and you do the same thing again. And then you have the full week to get your reading and work done. I think that would work for people like us, old people, who are going to be diligent and get their work done and, be thoughtful and spread their work out. But I don't know if a bunch of undergrad students, A, want that because then you don't get the college experience, or B, have the organizational skills to do that. So if we're going to be marketing it to, middle-aged men and women, I think this is a good model. But if we're marketing it to 19-year-olds or 17-year-olds, yikes.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And there's probably room for both within the environment, within our communities. But again, it's finding that mix, and throwing all of the eggs into one basket versus the other is
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah. And
Okay.
so the big cry from Cornwall, 'cause that's where I am, is that we need a business program. We need a business program. We can't live without a business program. So what they're doing is they're taking our business program and flipping it asynchronous online. So now Glenn can say, "Oh, Cornwall, you have a business program. You can't say we abandoned you." But yet that's not how 17-year-olds will learn how to do business well. And so we're going to be taking their money either to not learn anything or taking their money to fail. Take your pick. But again, it's not designed for the 17-year-old. And we know since the pandemic, 17-year-olds don't want to do online learning.
Or they do if they know that they can kind of coast through it easily, because they've got all the workarounds for it and come out the other end of it with a diploma, but not the skills that an employer is going to want to bring
And
on.
we're not going to see that until, 3, 4 years down the road, where we get our employer survey where they start saying your employees, your students are shit. And that will happen, but it's going to take several years down the road. When are we going to pivot then? I don't know.
So this is all kind of happening, and it would happen whether or not there was a merger. But with the merger, um, are we seeing that just kind of sped up? Is that the impact that
Well,
the merger has on this model?
I think this model is because or being encouraged by the merger, or the merger is encouraging this model. I think this is they're trying to get this model to work. So the nursing um, program has had this model for a while, where nurses do their online studies and then they do their labs in person and then they do their testing in person and then they do the practicum in their local hospitals. And is it grandly successful? No, but is it working? Yes, to an extent. Very practical, hands on. So I think if that's the way we're going to go, then maybe, but that means a big change in how we teach, who teaches, and where we teach. Um, and I don't know how that's going to impact faculty because we don't know, is it going to be everywhere? Is it going to be all programs? Again, I can't, this is not an expansionist model. There is no way. If we're going to offer the program to everybody, all 6 campuses, then it's going to be online asynchronous or mostly online asynchronous. And it's going to be find your own field placement in your community and move forward. That's the only way we retain all those.
Okay. And Jillian, what do you say to faculty who are turning to the union saying, tell us what's going on. Tell us what's happening. You should be in a role where you're able to influence this. Can you stop the merger?
Yeah, great. Sure. Love to. Fabulous. No, I know nothing more than any member. And if you want this merger to stop, then you need to start standing up and saying, whoa, 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 slow down. And you need to tell not just your associate dean, but you need to tell your communities, you need to tell your PACs, you need to tell your mayors. We have an important role in talking to our communities. We need to talk to our mayors specifically because their towns are going to be impacted. Their regions are going to be impacted. Small towns like Cornwall and Brockville, are you going to keep your young people if there's no college there anymore? If it's an online asynchronous college, are your young people going to stay? And if they don't stay for post-secondary, do they come back? We know they don't. And that becomes a huge issue in the smaller communities. And I'm talking about Cornwall and Brockville, but that would go with Halliburton and Lindsay as well. The big cities have more options, but the small communities, we don't. So we need to have members start talking to their communities and asking the mayors and asking the city councilors, what does this mean? What does this mean for the college? You tell us, because the college is not talking to us. And so we have no control. And we are supposed to be embedded in the community. We are supposed to respond to their needs. Does this respond to their needs? Is the college actually talking to community leaders and members? Hell no. They've got a role. They're going to do what they're going to do, and so be it. So high school teachers, city councilors, principals, the mayor, parents, all of those people we need to ask them the question, what will you do when?
And it's easy to do that right now because this fall there's a municipal election coming up. You're going to have an awful lot of people knocking on your doors. So asking them about what they're going to do and what this means for the college is going to be really important.
Absolutely. And for us that live in the two smaller communities, we really need to push that point, because the efficiency survey clearly said that if we're still in debt, in 2028, Rockville closes, and in 2030, Cornwall closes. So unless suddenly we get some money, big money, that we're not $14 million in debt, as we know we are this year, then we need to be asking our municipal councilors, how are you going to save our college? Because without the college, it's not just the good jobs that they provide, but they do provide really good jobs. We also keep young people in the community. And without the young people in the communities die.
Just let that sink in for a minute. Closures.
Yeah. Yeah. Clearly. So the efficiency report, and if you haven't read the efficiency report, you need to read the efficiency report. It should be your summer reading. I know you'll need a beer with it or a glass of wine because it's going to be rough to read, because there's nothing beautiful about it. But this was written, and if you look at it and if you had a scorecard for everything that is done in the efficiency report, we are following it like a flippin' playbook. We are doing step by step by step by step. And when they wrote it, there were some variables, but those variables are still, we haven't met the criteria to keep everything open and flowing. And so it doesn't say we will merge, but it's definitely a potential within that efficiency report.
Well, and there's that second efficiency report that we haven't seen too, right?
There's that mystery one, which is the Eastern Ontario college system. And honestly, like if you were asked me a year ago, I would have said, you know what? I think we're going to be the Eastern Ontario College. Most provinces, with the exception of Ontario and Quebec, have one college system. And it would not have surprised me if, Ontario's huge, that we wouldn't have had one college system, but maybe 5 or 6. Eastern Ontario, Western Ontario, Northern Ontario, Central Ontario, and then 3 or 4 in the GTA. Like that to me was where the roadmap was written. So when we said we were merging, I wasn't shocked because I knew mergers were in the offing. When they said we were merging with Fleming, bizarre, but okay. That was just strange to me. But again, I think this is going to happen. We're just the litmus test. We're just the first of. They're going to try, let everybody's wait and see how St. Lawrence and Fleming does. And then the other colleges will learn from our colossal mistakes and move forward.
Hmm. All right. And the letter that you've sent to Glenn talks about engagement. Engage now, not later. What does meaningful engagement look like?
Well, tell us what the hell the plan is. So I had a conversation when we first started closing stuff. And it was the most terrifying conversation I've ever had with Glenn. It was one-on-one, and it was in his tour of we're going to, we're going to explain how Cornwall is becoming a learning center and all that stuff when we were making those changes and closing those programs and those intakes. And I said, Glenn, what's the plan? Like, be a leader, be a friggin' leader, and tell us what the plan is. And if you're too embarrassed to tell us what the plan is, then it's probably a shitty plan. And he looked at me dead in the face. He says, I don't have a plan. And that, honestly, that was the worst thing anybody's ever said to me, because holy shit. So either he's a really good liar, or at that time, which was nearly 2 years ago, he didn't have a plan, which is, I think I'd rather a liar than no plan. But again, terrifying. So what does meaningful engagement mean? Tell us what the flipping plan is, and then engage with us so that we can implement this plan. Again, we are members of the union and we are faculty and support staff. We don't get to manage. Management gets to make certain choices. They can manage badly. We don't have that control. But if they don't tell us what the plan is, then we're going to be in all sorts of pain and hurt in the future because nothing is organized. And at the end of the day, the people who are interfacing with students and parents are us. And if we don't understand the plan, we cannot implement it. And so the first step to meaningful engagement is, what's the plan? So at CEC, before I went on leave, I asked the question, how much money do we have to save? Tell us the number. If you don't want to tell us the number that we have to save $80 million or whatever the number is, I don't care. Tell us a number, then we can work towards that number together. Or if the plan is we need to reduce faculty by 40%, 20%, 15%, 12.25%, I don't know, then tell us that number and then we can work towards that number as well. But it's this mystery, we need to cut because we don't have enough money. What the hell does that mean?
They didn't even use those words. We're just aligning. We're
Yeah.
streamlining and aligning.
Aligning with what? You
Yeah.
know, with what the vision is. Well, what the fuck is the vision? Pardon my language.
When you don't have a plan.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go to Article 28. What role does that play in demanding information?
So Article 28 is fabulous and horrible all at the same time, of course, because our collective agreement sometimes feels like it was written by monkeys with 1,000 typewriters. So Article 28 states that we can ask for all the information we need to be able to make decisions at the CSC. So we have real big carte blanche, and Kaplan reinforced that we have the ability to ask for all the information. The problem becomes they want us to ask for very specific information, and it takes months and months and months to get that. And then it's couched in generalities. So we don't get information. I ask for information like, how much does the savings have to be? Oh, no, we're aligning. How many faculty, what percentage of faculty do we have to lose to make sure that we are within budget? Oh, no, we're just aligning faculty with program closures. So the program closures, how much money did we have to say? Oh, no, if there were no international students, then we were going to close those. Okay, but you didn't close nursing. Nursing, doesn't make any money, but it's still there. Well, that's because there's a community need. Well, yeah, I would argue that, child and youth worker, there's a community need too. And it was filled with students. It was not low enrollment. And yet we closed that one. So again, we get in these circles of logic where we get little bits of information, but nothing is really tangible. So one of my goals in the fall is to really push with tangible questions. We need to know exactly what programs are going to remain after the merger. We need to know exactly how many faculty per program do they want. I suspect it's one full-time faculty per year of program, only because I'm looking at the trends. So if it's a 1-year program, there's one full-time faculty. If it's a 2-year program, there's 2. 3-year program, there's 3. Again, all sorts of exceptions. Nursing being one, child and youth worker being another one, where it's been eliminated. But if that's where we're going, at least then we can prepare our members. And I don't want to be scaring anybody, but I'm going to say it as flatly and as plainly as I can. If you have an option to get out, get out. Get your CV, go. Don't wait. Unless you are waiting because you're going to get a nice severance package. Great. Wait. Plan. Have a plan. But have a plan ready to go. I don't want to see anybody blindsided by this. And so I'm being as plain as I possibly can. Be ready to go. And if a good opportunity comes, take it. Because we don't know what the potential is for moving forward. And I know that's going to get people riled up. And I know that's going to get people scared and frustrated. And eventually management will be, hearing this and accuse me of scare tactics. And this is reality. We have been really lucky. And I will say names of people who have really worked their ass off to support us. Tabitha Rutledge, Barb LeBlanc have been incredible at trying to keep jobs. And yes, Barb LeBlanc, management, upper management, but she's done yeoman service in keeping jobs. And Tabitha, can't even say enough good things about her. But even with them working their asses off, they have not been able to save all the jobs. And we've come out with less job layoffs than any other college in the province, pretty close. So we know we're not the exception. We're just slower than others. We have Barb and Tabitha supporting us. And so they've been able to slow things down. But this avalanche of loss is reality. 11,000 jobs in the province. 11,000 jobs in the province. And yet nobody in the media is talking about it. There were 3,000 layoffs at one plant in Sault Ste. Marie, and the world was ending. They closed a shift. I know it's a big deal in a small community, but 11,000 jobs? And it's like, this is a big deal.
And when, you and I are both grandparents, what are the options for young people coming in? What are the options for kids coming through high school right now? What's it going to look like?
We don't know.
You have to go to university if you want, or do you go and learn on the job at a certain place and get tied to, and let's face it, how many employers are around forever? Those things don't happen anymore.
Nope. And I think there's honestly, this is going to sound completely conspiracy theory, so take it as you want. And you might actually want to cut this, but I think there's a concerted plan by Doug Ford to undereducate the population. And the reason why he wants an undereducated population is because there are a lot of jobs that our international students and our new migrants to Canada used to take, and they're not there anymore to take them. And if we have an educated population, they're not willing to take those shitty jobs. And so if we undereducate our young people, they'll have no other choice but to take the shitty jobs. And
And
that,
when
I
you
know
have to
that's
work 3 jobs to pay the rent.
yeah. And I know I think, there's a real push for undereducation. And rural communities are the easiest to undereducate because they have to, regardless of where you live, unless you're in downtown Cornwall, such that it is, you're going to have to commute. And if the commute is 30 minutes to Cornwall, it's not going to be possible to commute to Brockville or Kingston or Toronto. And so you're just not going to be able to get post-secondary. And as a grandma, I really am aware that my granddaughters will eventually have to go outside of their community to study. And my son and I, we have the financial wherewithal to be able to envision that and do that, but not every family.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So, right now we're talking about collective action, how we can all come together and do what we can to fight against these changes. It starts with funding at the provincial level. I'm assuming that's kind of where Glenn always points when he's talking about what's going on. What is our fight? What's the message?
So yeah, it's a funding issue, but I don't think it's the same funding issue that we thought it was. I think the funds are there, or at least part of the funds are there. It's who's getting the flipping funds and what are they doing with those funds. Having one company with 3 students or 4 students and giving them gobs of money is not fiscally responsible. We could have the same number of students. We could have 30 students and they could be getting a 1-year or 2-year diploma and doing field placements and being flexible, and that's fiscally responsible. So I don't think it's necessarily a funding issue. It's how those funds are allocated. So the feds are dumping money into the province, and the province is giving it to this skills development fund, which is going to private businesses. And it's not like, unlike what people think it's going to a private college. Oh, it's still a college. It's not going to a private college. It's going to a private business who's taking on, basically they're being paid to take on apprentices that will only apprentice in their workplace. And so great for the 6 months or 8 months or 2 years that they remain there, but it's not long-term. And we're doing it per student. And we're not doing it in like classrooms of 30 or 50 or 155. We're doing it in these small amounts. So funding is one issue. I think the collective action needs to start, well, it needs to start a week ago or a month ago or 6 months ago, but we need to all understand that if we don't start standing up together, we are not going to have campuses to stand together in. And again, I'm calling out Brockville and Cornwall and Lindsay and Halliburton because we're small and we're easy to lose. And Glenn said in one of his meetings, the only colleges that are fiscally viable are the ones with one campus. Man said it. He doesn't mix his words up. So if you don't believe me, believe Glenn. And then what the hell does that mean? Does that mean, everything else is online, asynchronous, but comes out of Kingston and Peterborough? Maybe. So if you want to keep your job, if you want to keep your college in your community, you need to have the community push back. And we've seen success. So Brockville was always, oh my God, is Brockville going to survive this year? Is Brockville going to survive last year? And over again, the community stand up and said, no, we want this college. We want this campus. We want these programs, including the arts, because it was really important to them. But if we don't stand up and start pushing every way we can, we're not going to get that. So we're going to be doing like a series of stress tests and information that we want members to engage with. So talk to a part-timer, have them sign their card. Really simple. If you know a part-time faculty, ask them if they signed a union card. I'm not asking you to ask every part-timer. One that works in your department. One that you see that teaches a course down the hall from you. Ask them if they've signed their union card. Do they know they're now unionized? That's one way of just starting with collective action. When we get to, we're going to be having demand set because we're going to be going into probably the hardest negotiations for a contract next September. So we're starting early, and that demand set will be important. There'll be a survey coming out. We need to know what you want. I can guess, number one thing we want, keep our jobs. But is there anything else? Working conditions, like all of those things. It doesn't have to be financial. It can be. with the price of rent now the way it is, it may have to be, but we need to talk about what do we want. So our goal, my little goal for our full-timers and partial loads is I would like to get 60% of us to fill out that survey. That's a huge ask. It's not a 20-hour survey. It's, 10 questions on an online form. But I'm going to be contacting, or Tabitha and I will be contacting everybody. Please fill out the survey. Please, please, please. So that way college knows that we have the information from the grant. And then municipal elections come in October. We need to talk to the councillors and the mayor. We need to have them ask the question, how are you going to save our campus? What are you going to do to save our campus? And if it's, I didn't even know the campus was in trouble, then that's probably not the person you want to vote for. And if there is that response, then educate them about the importance of not just your job in the community, but what the college does for the community. We often think of the provincial government as having a lot of power, but actually the local government has a lot of power too. And we need to leverage that because they're our neighbors. If you haven't been touched by the layoffs, just in our tri-campus, you've been incredibly lucky. But I think nearly every one of us has been touched by a layoff or an involuntary transfer or a sudden retirement.
This has been a difficult conversation, Gillian. Is there anything that's giving you hope right now?
I am always hopeful. I'm in education for a reason, and our students give us hope and power by their learning and their understanding. And I'm also encouraged by the small things, by Tabitha and Barb working so incredibly hard to save those jobs. We've had a few recalls in the last few weeks, and those little recalls have given me hope. So there is hope there. It's going to be a hard battle. And if any you all will know me, I am not Mary Sunshine. So I am refreshed and armed for a fight because I think we're about to go into one, and it's not a fight against the college, against management. It's a fight for our lives. And sometimes that'll be with them, and sometimes that'll be against them, and all sorts of things. But it is a fight for our very survival as SLC faculty.
The future of our work is being planned now through funding decisions, restructuring, mergers, and the quiet expansion of alternative delivery models. But as the CAAT bulletin reminds us, our responses must change too. Gillian, thank you for joining us and for stepping into leadership at a moment when faculty need clarity, courage, and collective action. To our listeners, stay engaged, ask questions, talk to your colleagues, and remember, the work isn't disappearing, it's moving. And now it's merging, and we need to move with it together.
Now for Part-Time and All In with Dale Gartshore.
This week on Part-Time and All In, we're checking back in with Greg Dixon, Vice Chair of the Part-Time and Sessional Academic Bargaining Team. Greg's been bouncing between divisional meetings and bargaining dates, and he's just back from another round at the table. I asked him how things are going and what members need to know as we head toward demand setting this fall. So, Greg, you had your first face-to-face divisional, then basically went straight into bargaining again. How did that go?
It's always interesting going to the table. We had our day 3 and then our day 4. And I was a bit curious. For our third day at the table, we continued on with some ground rule revisions, as we had been. And we were a bit surprised. The College and Board Council had said on, I think day 2 it was, that they would have something for us, but didn't. We wanted to make the most of the day, so we tabled our first proposal that was focusing on equity, ensuring that as a foundation, the purpose of the collective agreement is to make sure that equity issues are being addressed through a lens that deals with a lot of systemic issues, especially anti-Black racism and Indigenous racism and colonialism, so that in recognition of the history that we have and our diversity, that collective agreement is going to be hopefully a bit different than past practice, and that foundation is set in a collaborative approach between us and the College Employer Council, and that equity is respected, and that the lessons of the past are learned from, and that we move together towards a better foundation for a future, starting with that collective agreement there.
A foundational equity clause, that's a big first step. And of course, the other constant theme for part time and sessional faculty is precarity. You've been talking about precarity since day one. How is that landing at the table?
I don't think we've had a day without talking about it in one way, sense, or form. Every 4 months, we never know what contract we have, if we have a contract, how many hours, what courses. If we don't have a contract for that next semester, and the difficulty that that does. And that this applies to all contract faculty, including our partial load, not just our part-time and sessional. But also the difficulty in terms of, we had our bargaining survey from the last 6 months or so, and we found roughly on average our part-time sessional employees are making maybe only about 30,000 a year. Almost half of them, this is their primary income. So financially, there's a lot of precarity there. There's a lot of issues with job security. It also exists as a conversation at the table with the College Employer Council that, we're not a full-time unit that is in bargaining. We're a part-time unit. A lot of our members, including those on our bargaining team, have work outside of the college because they have to in order to meet their financial obligations. Part-time does not pay enough on its own. And so a lot of us have to work outside and have those obligations. And it unfortunately sounds like it is still very much not being fully comprehended at the table, just how precarious our members are and those of us even on the bargaining team are. As much as we would like to have dates set in stone for the fall already, ultimately we're at the behest of the colleges to know when we get or don't get our contracts for the fall so we can make those decisions. A very important point was raised that, as much as we can, make time from our teaching schedule to be at the bargaining table, what isn't accounted for is if we don't get enough hours or a contract at all, we have to find outside work in order to make our financial obligations. And that work is much harder to move around, switch shifts, use personal vacation days to be at the bargaining table. And unfortunately, that still hasn't really been comprehended by the College Employer Council, which is a bit perplexing. We're still awaiting resolution on that, and maybe we'll have an update come our next scheduled day on August 19th.
And of course, precarity isn't just financial, it's structural. Contracts come late, hours shift, and the colleges openly describe part time faculty as flexible labor.
Exactly. And I think a key point is that the College Employer Council's perspective, I think in their opening statement, that, they view part time and contract faculty in general as, the flexible employees to kind of more or less fill in the gaps where they need it, and bring that industry experience. Well, you have to then put two and two together. It's like, well, if we're to be flexible and bring that industry experience, that means a number of us have to be working other jobs. And so, a number of our members, roughly half, this is not their primary job. This is something they do on the side, whether for, financial benefit, professional experience, or to give back to even for some, their own community college that they went to back in the day. So I think that's an important piece to be recognized as well.
And while all this is happening, the unit is growing fast, which means organizing has to grow with it. You're heading into demand setting in the fall. How do you do that when your membership keeps expanding every semester?
So one thing that we are doing that's kind of new now that we're wall to wall CAAT across the colleges, and meow. One of the things that we're working on is creating local organizing committees at every college, which consist of at least one member, ideally more, from each of the four units. So full time and part time, academic and support staff. Because at the end of the day, we all need to find our members. Although it's been an easier process due to less turnover up until recently for full time units, it's always been a challenge to find our rotating part time, both faculty and support. And typically, we've found that it is our colleagues in the other units that are better able to find our own members rather than us. Faculty can find support staff, and support staff can find faculty better than we can do on our own. That will help as well kind of disseminate the workload that would be traditionally on maybe one or two people on a local executive committee or LEC. And hopefully have a bit more people working at it. I'll give a big shout out to Conestoga College that I forget what number they're at. 76 or something like that was the last number I heard for their local organizing committee. And they are just doing fantastic at finding members, getting them signed up, educating their members about what it means to be in a union, where they are in the bargaining process depending on their unit, and building that solidarity and aligning of goals across those four units at their college. And that's something that we hope to see at every college.
And that solidarity matters because the CC's strategy has always been divide and conquer.
For far too long, even before academic part-time got certified, our employers, and whether you want to do, small C colleges or capital C college employer council, really took on the divide and conquer approach with us. Not only in bargaining, but also for us, upholding our collective agreements for the units that had it. And I think that there has been a lot of knowledge shared and learned even in this one last past year across the units, especially with us being represented at each of the divisionals last month, that there are really good things that each unit has figured out to do that has helped their members and has helped to build momentum, especially in bargaining rounds. And that a lot of that is transferable across all of our units, and that our units can really support each other um, much more when we're, in constant communication with each other, whether at a local level through a local organizing committee, or even through the provincial level through divisional executives and bargaining team.
So, what's next? Demand setting.
Precarity and job security, as we've heard, at least from the delegates and alternates at our divisional and their general membership through the survey. But is it also things like wages and benefits? Is it workload? Is it bargaining for the common good? Those are all things that we want to get a little bit more concrete of an idea from members as we segue into that demand set this fall. And that demand set is where we will have specific particular demands within those bargaining priority categories like workload or wages and benefits or job security, where there might be, specific items that talk to, this much is the hourly rate, or this is how seniority will function, this is how credits are earned. If members want something similar to like a partial load registry, here's particular demands for how that might be created or enacted.
And yes, wages are all over the map.
Full-time and partial load academic is as standardized as it gets, followed by full-time support. But even then, especially as we get into the part-time support, it becomes really vague and uncertain as to, if you do the same job at one college, are you getting paid the same if you were to transfer to another college to do the exact same job? Part-time support especially has had a lot of hardship and difficulty with, I think this is their fourth bargaining round, where they unfortunately have yet to get a standardized wage grid or even job descriptions. And I want to use that point as a really strong point to emphasize to, any of our members that are listening, that we really need to make sure that we are getting a fair first collective agreement. Using this as the example for part-time support, things like a wage grid and job descriptions were not something that were particularly, held out and fought for in their first collective agreement. And so as a result, they still have yet to become anything in their collective agreement, even though it's been a contentious issue since their first collective agreement. So I want to stress the importance of making sure that, we have a really good comprehensive first collective agreement for our members in part-time sessional, because that really shapes every subsequent round of bargaining and collective agreement revisions. And if you start off with something less than what your members need, it's significantly harder to get those pieces after that first collective agreement has been established than fighting for it in that first opening round.
Okay.
But I will also mention part-time and sessional hourly rates. They're even more, I'd say, convoluted across the colleges. Some colleges pay a flat rate per hour regardless of anyone's expertise. Some colleges use kind of a step grid based on the partial load 2018 pay grid that existed, obviously without any increases since 2018. So there's a lot of inflation loss to wages over that near decade. Some colleges kind of just, pick a number and that's what they go with. Some colleges are plus minus a few cents from each other. But even where colleges might use a similar wage grid, their creative mathematics that they use to determine where someone's pay step would be, similar to a partial load or full-time faculty, varies by associate dean or dean, varies by college, varies by department. And, I remember hearing a tale from one new faculty that was pretty much onboarded and said, well, I have these extra credentials. Shouldn't I be at a higher step than this other person who's just starting out? And their manager said, well, yeah, like I could ask HR, but, if we don't get you that pay step, would you still take the contract for what we will pay you right now? And I think that really just links back to that precarity where for some of our members, we don't have a choice. You take what you can get at whatever fraction of an amount of money that, our colleagues in full-time partial load would get. Because if you say no, then you entirely run the risk of management thinking that, well, they're not interested. We'll never give them a contract again.
And workload? Same story.
Yeah, so we've seen, I think one of the terms that gets used is the unbundling or debundling of workload. And typically it starts at, the top of the, let's say, compensation scale of typically full-time faculty work. And where possible, even things like academic coordination gets converted into a full-time support staff option, or even a part-time support staff option. Or it goes to contract faculty if there's not a full-timer either interested or maybe even left in a program or department at this point with all the layoffs that we have seen now. From teaching, we have seen it debundled or unbundled from full-time faculty to contract faculty to, I think, was it independent contractors as some colleges are using now, even though that's a whole can of worms to be further assessed. And we've also seen a lot of traditional academic duties beyond the classroom turned into support staff roles as well. And we've seen full-time support staff roles chopped into part-time support staff roles at, lack of pay grid and lack of job description, multiple people working for less money than one person would have gotten at the time of doing it full-time. And that applies to both academic and support staff. And to the workload point, often we're seeing more work having to be done for the same or less money on a regular basis.
Greg also walked through the proposals already tabled, the Equity Foundation Clause, the Recognition Clause, and the Employee-Employer Relations Committee, a structure the three other units already have.
The first proposal we tabled on day 3 that had to do with that kind of equity lens focus for the Foundation for a Collective Agreement. On day 4 at the table, we proposed 2 further proposals. One dealing with the recognition clause, which basically states, who or who isn't covered by our collective agreement within the part-time and sessional faculty unit. The obvious being it includes part-time and sessional faculty, including professors and instructors, as well as our part-time or sessional librarians and counselors. And then our third proposal looks at the employee-employer relations committee, again, setting a foundation for once we have a collective agreement, how is it going to be, collaboratively interpreted, which basically creates a collaborative framework with the College Employer Council and representatives from our bargaining unit.
And of course, disclosure, the never-ending story.
But we need to talk about disclosure. We always have to talk about disclosure. So, whether it's getting accurate lists, we have got some updated lists at least just this past month. So that's been a bit helpful for the spring, summer to find who and where we have part-time and sessional faculty teaching right now or employed as librarians and counselors. But there's still a lot of outdated things, things like what technological changes or strategic changes. Basically, this is alluding to things like, automation by AI or things like, mergers like St. Lawrence and Fleming, if that's going to happen somewhere else. We are still kind of awaiting actual information on that. We did clarify some issues on what the College Employer Council had found was too vague or open a request. So we've provided specific clarifications so that they can hopefully look into those things and get back to us. But there are still quite a few outstanding disclosure items, which is a problem when we want to collectively bargain for our members because, despite the College Employer Council having most of this information already, they're not being as forthcoming as they could be. Whether it's saying, well, that'll be published as publicly available information in the fall. Well, we're in bargaining now, so you already have that information. The colleges already have that information. Why can't we have it now rather than waiting to tackle that until several months from now? That really heavily informs the bargaining rounds, as we have found out from our fellow, full-time support and academic units, where finding out something in disclosure can and has changed the entire course of that bargaining round. We're waiting for some of the information that we need to make sure that we can best represent our members at the table and not rush into, a really quick collective agreement for the sake of having one if it's going to be worse for our members down the road or even the moment it takes effect.
And finally, Ontario Learn, the black box of black boxes.
It's such a black box. We're waiting disclosure on that as well. We're doing some research into it as well through OPSU. And it's really weird because it's not even consistent across the colleges. Some colleges have actually kind of dismantled their Ontario Learn black box and sent their respective courses back to their home academic departments. Those courses are being taught by our typical, full-time or part-time sessional and partial load faculty, as they should be as academic courses. While as some colleges, we see them using support staff up until we were certified, and now that we're certified, we see them trying to scapegoat all four bargaining units by calling them something else that doesn't exist in the college's bargaining act. And we see managers even teaching sometimes in there or in general courses as well. And that's something that we're trying to tackle as well in this bargaining round, is making sure that effectively any teaching happening at a college is within our academic division.
That's Greg Dixon, Vice Chair of the Part-Time and Sessional Academic Bargaining Team. A huge amount of work ahead, but also a huge amount of momentum. If you're a part-time or sessional faculty member, make sure you've signed your electronic membership form. Your voice shapes the first collective agreement. And as Greg said, that first agreement sets the foundation for every round that follows.
You've been listening to Cat Tales, stories that matter to faculty and beyond. Don't miss an episode. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Visit slcfaculty.ca and stay connected with us on social media.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the speakers and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policies, positions, or statements of OPSU, CEFCO, St. Lawrence College, or any affiliated organizations. This podcast is provided for informational and educational purposes only. While every effort is made to ensure accuracy, SLC Faculty Local 417 makes no representations or warranties of any kind, express or implied, about the completeness, reliability, or suitability of the information shared. Any reliance placed on such information is strictly at the listener's own risk. Music and sound effects used in this podcast are licensed or royalty-free. We respect copyright law and encourage our listeners do the same.